We're joined now by Jamil Jaffer, former law clerk for Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. We appreciate your time, Jamil. What is the likelihood this leak did in fact come from a clerk?
Well, look, we know that Politico got the opinion from a individual, likely at the court. They said an individual with knowledge of the case proceedings and the like. So it looks like it's likely it came from somebody inside the court. Now, that could have been a law clerk. I suppose it could have been a justice, but seems unlikely. And it could have been a member of another member of justice's staff. It could have been a member of the court staff, as there are a number of folks who work on these opinions, but while they're still in draft form, to site check them and get them ready. So there's a lot of folks that it might have been, but certainly law clerks who are the closest people to a justice, who work directly in the drafting and editing of their opinions and other justices' opinions, could be involved in the inappropriate disclosure of this opinion.
So, Jamil, something like this, this draft, it seems like there could be a lot of information in there that is pretty sensitive, right? So what type of access do Supreme Court clerks actually have about this information for this decision?
Well, it varies from chamber to chamber. Interestingly, the Supreme Court, while it is a single entity and all of the chambers, each justice has their own chamber, operates under the overall supervision of the Supreme Court with HR and computers and the like. They all operate individually and they all function depending on how that justice wants their chambers to function. More often than not, a single clerk is assigned to a given case. They'll often discuss it with the justice. They'll discuss it with the people in the office as well as their co-clerks. So many people in a single chambers, many law clerks may have access to the decision in order to read it, to discuss it with the justice, and to discuss it with their colleagues who are actually working substantively on that matter.
How unusual is this request for the phone records?
It's very unusual. It's surprising to see anyone, including the marshal's office, ask the Supreme Court clerks for their individual personal phone records. But obviously, we're in an unprecedented situation. We've never seen the disclosure of a draft opinion from the Supreme Court ever in the history of the court. There have been some leaks about case decisions and outcomes in the past. That's actually itself a surprising fact that I think a lot of people didn't know. But this is the first time we've seen an opinion released. So an unprecedented situation, an unprecedented ask, one that I think, by the way, is unlikely to be fulfilled because justices tend to be very protective of how their own chambers function.
So what about the privacy aspects of this? Is that really allowed for them to just kind of dive into their cell phone records?
Well, obviously they do have employment restrictions. They can't be disclosing information outside the court. And so the effort to investigate this matter, if there's something wrong with the court doing that, but trying to actually get their hands on these cell phone records of these individuals, one, obviously the clerks are going to be concerned about that. Their justices are going to be concerned because if they're asking for the clerk's records, what happens if they ask for the justices' records, right? And the clerks might be doing stuff on behalf of the justices. And so, in a lot of ways, we might look back at the history of the Roe v. Wade decision, whose outcome was disclosed to Time magazine early on. And there, we had a similar investigation sought to be conducted by the Chief Justice. And a lot of justices pushed back and said, nobody's going to ask my law clerk's question. I'll do that. Or they just sort of ignored the directive from the chief. And at the end of the day, they did figure out who had been involved in it. It was a law clerk for Justice Powell. But, it wasn't because of the investigation. That law clerk ultimately fessed up and went to his justice. And then the justice told the chief.
What? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What type of punishment could this person or persons who are responsible for the leak face?
Well, certainly there could be internal punishment in the sense of a job action taken. They could be dismissed from their employment. They are at-will employees. There are, of course, potential laws that could have been violated if they didn't tell the truth in the course of the investigation. That might be lying to a federal official. As we saw, Michael Sussman was charged with a similar crime. He was just recently exonerated of that crime. They could also be charged with removing or doing something improper with federal property. So there are a few laws that might apply. But by and large, what's likely to happen is they're likely to face a internal punishment and probably some significant damage to their long-term careers as lawyers if they're determined to be involved in the inappropriate disclosure of this opinion.
So if you could look into a crystal ball right now, do you see this whole situation changing the way the Supreme Court operates when it comes to how many people may have access to a draft or anything like that?
Yeah, I do think that there may be changes to the way the Supreme Court functions, and none of them particularly good because, in a lot of ways, the functioning of the court relies on a level of trust between the justices, their law clerks, the secretaries, the assistants, the marshals, all the staff of the court to know that everyone's going to do the right thing. Nobody's going to disclose decisions or the opinions themselves. And that trust has been breached. And, look, even though these are some of the most controversial cases in the country that come before the court for some of the hardest legal questions, the bulk of them are decided 9-0, 8-1, 7-2. They're not all these 5-4 controversial cases that we all talk about day to day. And even those are going to be hard to do if the trust has been eroded. So we really have to figure out a way to prevent these things from happening and to prevent the sort of culture that we now have where people think it's appropriate to go to justices' houses and protest like they're politicians. That's just not our culture, and we should be doing that.
Yeah, and it just reinforces the view that the Supreme Court is being more and more politicized, because the speculation immediately after this is somebody doing this, leaking this for a political reason.
Yeah.
Jamil Jaffer, former Supreme Court law clerk, thank you so much for your time and your perspective. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.